It's another emergency program stroke podcast. If you're watching, look, I've got a book here. It's called Their Finest Hour, the history of the Rugby League World Cup in 10 matches by our friend Andrew Marmont. Now, unfortunately, there won't be any matches added in 2021 to the latest version of this book, because this is not their finest hour. This is whatever the opposite of that is. Phil, the World Cup is off for a year. Everyone's upset about it because, you know, it's the bloody Australians and their puppets from New Zealand have caused this. Because if they were coming over, we wouldn't have this problem at all.
Everyone's upset about it except the Australians who've caused it. I think it's probably time for a little bit more honesty around this debate. And clearly, I thought even today, in their desperate disappointment, the measured response of John Dutton, Chris Brindley, who I think came out of the conference really well, the chair of Rugby League World Cup 2021, and obviously Troy Grant, who I think is just caught in the middle of the rock and the hard place. I think there needs to be a touch of honesty. I think the Australian / New Zealand have hidden behind COVID as an excuse. I think we've seen in their reaction since the announcement, from particularly some of the things that Peter V'landys has said on radio that have been completely inappropriate, from the fact that even the Kangaroos Twitter feed is announcing a team at the same time as they're withdrawing from a tournament. And the truth is that just before the weekend, a poll went out from the Rugby League World Cup organisers to the majority of players who would have been playing for nations other than Australia and New Zealand, but are based in the NRL, just to see if they were still committed to coming. Those players, who we think numbered mainly about 180, I think John said on the call, over 80% said they were still keen to come. We'd seen tweets even from Ewan Aitken saying that he was happy to come over and play for Scotland. So I think the card that Rugby League World Cup 2021 played was player representation, player choice, player voice was how they put it. And the bulk of the player choice was still to come. But I think what became obvious as they were asking that question of the players was that at the same time, pressure was being put on them by the NRL clubs to say, it's going to be difficult for you to accept this invitation because clearly we have made our point absolutely clear. We don't want you to go. We're even looking at clauses in your contract that will prevent you from going. And actually what we really want, and it's starting to become even more painfully obvious, is that we want to stage some internationals over here that don't involve quarantine, that will make us a bit of cash at a time when we need some money back. There'll be a lot of interest in Australia, New Zealand and Tonga in particular playing internationals, bearing in mind the recent results between those nations. So here's our big two fingers up to the Northern Hemisphere. We're not coming, and it's absolutely nothing to do with COVID. So all of the people that said, but look at all the other sports people that are able to practice in Tokyo or coming over here in the autumn at the same time, it is nothing to do with that. The biosecurity measures were as good as anybody else will be coming under. The Indian cricket team are playing a test match at the moment in front of thousands of people, and there are biosecurity measures attached to them, and they're happy to do it, and they're here for the remainder of the summer. It's nothing to do with that. This is politics, pure and simple. It's the Australians who are having complete disdain for anybody other than themselves. There is no money for them in a World Cup. It's more their greater obligation, as we heard from Rob Bergin on the excellent podcast that he did earlier in the week, and they couldn't give a stuff about that.
I'm trying to think of the phrase that doesn't involve swearing, but it begins with an S.
I nearly swore then. I nearly swore.
It begins with S and ends in show, and that's what it will be if they do host internationals this autumn.
Well,
I mean,
hopefully... It will, yeah, it will and it won't, because I think by the same token, we will have to host some here as well.
Oh, of course, but we haven't caused this mess. So if they host Australia versus New Zealand, and I do hope the IRL don't give them test status, even though they will, because the Australians don't give a stuff what the IRL think. They'll call them tests and they'll give them caps, and we'll still be in a mess as it is. And then we'll give Scully his cap and we'll say, two fingers up to you in Australia and New Zealand. We don't care what you think anymore. You mentioned Rob on Tuesday. He mentioned sacrifices that their players have made in Brazil in terms of holiday, in terms of life decisions, as he put it. I want you to bring you two tweets I retweeted on the Forty20 account this afternoon. One from Tom Halliwell, captain of the England wheelchair team. He said, absolutely devastated. 4 years of hard work and sacrifices down the drain, 3 months before it's meant to start. For some, this was hope to pull through. Best start begging for those hours back at work. And one that I hadn't even thought about, because these are the things you don't think about. Faye Gaskin, of course, was on the show last year.
Yeah.
World Cup postponement is tough, a tough one to take for the girls who've worked so hard this year. But on hold, and this is something I never thought about, having families, weddings and careers for the sport they love. Weddings and careers, I guess, kind of passed through my mind, but I didn't think about that aspect for some of the female players who will be thinking about having families because they're of that age. And this would be something they would have delayed that decision for, to play in a World Cup on home soil at venues like Anfield, once in a lifetime opportunities, ruined by the selfishness of the Australian Commission. I think it's unforgivable. It was what was great about this morning was, and you've mentioned it, is the diplomacy from John Dutton and the rest of the World Cup organisers and the IRL, because they couldn't come out and say what we can say, which is the utter selfishness of what has gone on in this decision. I'm getting angry again. I was angry this morning and I've kind of eased off because I've been working. So I've had time to think about things. I'm angry about a lot of things in rugby league.
But I think we need to say it because I have every respect for you. So there's two things here that, again, and as we're saying this, the ire is rising. The sap is getting towards the top. What I think, again, was the final nail in the coffin of the World Cup happening this year was the absolute total and utter selfishness of the NRL to move their women's competition to the same time that the World Cup was due to be played. That is very much, you can do what you like, but we don't care. And we shouldn't forget that. But the other side of this coin, which is why Troy Grant is trying to play the peacemaker, which is why John knows he's going to have some more very serious conversations with people who he probably doesn't want to at the moment, is the IRL exists, and effectively the World Cup itself, as part of the money that is generated by international competition. And when half of the players for international competition come from that particular part of the world, you can't, and I'm going to swear, you can't piss them off. Because you have nothing without them. And it's all very well, I think if we could have had the Indigenous come in, if we could have had the Maori come in, if we could have had a commitment that Samoa and Tonga and Fiji and PNG were going to be as strong as they could be, we would have gone ahead without Australia and New Zealand. But the pressure that was put on by the 16 NRL clubs on their players, saying that we're even going to change clauses in your contracts, that even though you're at the moment obligated to be released, we're just going to renege on all of that, then those players, for all of the fact that they commendably said we want to come, knew that they couldn't. They would have to defy their weekly wage to come, and that would have been too much to ask of them. And as John Dalton pointed out, if it gets to the point where you don't know who's turning up until the week before they do, and the team that turns up isn't the team you thought was coming, then you're actually demeaning the idea of a World Cup. And the whole thing about the World Cup is it should be a pinnacle. The whole thing about the money generated in what should be a 4-year cycle is now going to be a 3-year cycle, is it pays for the next World Cup and international development, and actually the administration that is the IRL. So that stranglehold by the NRL at the moment. And the other thing is we need to acknowledge they're in a very strong position because they've got very strong leadership. They have got some issues of their own that they're trying to resolve in their domestic competition. We can put nothing up by comparison because we are in the incredibly weak position and we don't have any leadership. So there's nothing that the Northern Hemisphere at the moment, because of the disarray that Super League and the RFL are in, can bring to the party. And that's why, again, it's an unequitable relationship. And if it's a hand of poker, we're sitting there with a pair of twos. The World Cup in the middle have probably got, I don't know, a pair of twos and an ace. Australia have got a full house. We just cannot beat them at the moment, and I think that's the thing, that the NRL know that there is nothing that anybody can do this year to put on a tournament without them that will be completely credible. And it's all been now thrown back at John Dutton. Logistical problems are all yours. You sort it out. We've said we're coming. And at the back of everybody's mind is, yes, you've said you're coming, but you said you were coming this year and you never came. So are we just kicking a can down the road?
I want to talk about accountability later because it's important, but I guess the organisers now have to make a decision, and they look at next year. We're having the World Cup. They're going to have to rebook venues, and some may change, which is a big shame. I feel sorry for those who've booked hotels and transport and everything for this year. I'd be saying, sue the NRL in the small claims court. It's their fault. But you can't do that. I mean, if we're talking about self-interest, we ran Hull FC versus Huddersfield Giants at the same time as England versus the Combined Nations All-Stars. So, and it would have been Salford and Leeds as well, wouldn't it, if it hadn't been moved for COVID? So let's not pretend we're, angels in this. We're as selfish as anyone else. Just we, get away with it because no one cares. But when we look at this World Cup next year, do we have to put in the plan in place now where we will, if I say we as if I'm organising the World Cup, but the World Cup organisers have to put in place the fact that a contingency that if Australia and New Zealand in 12 months' time say we ain't coming, that we will pick a Australia side from the players who play over here. Same for New Zealand, same for anyone else. And if the players out there aren't happy with it, tough. That's what we're going to have to do to get this World Cup on, because it has to go ahead next year for every financial reason we mentioned before. And it's, you can't help but feel sorry for the organisers who put on all this work over the past 4 or 5 years, and we've seen it from our side in the media. I don't know how you rebook venues with less than a year to go, knowing that this was mentioned, and I hadn't even thought about this. The football season's a mess next year because of the World Cup. We can't play our World Cup exactly when we want it because of the FIFA World Cup, which is no fault of our own. There's the Women's Euros over here in the summer. There's the Commonwealth Games as well. We've got to fit everything in with where football grounds would not usually be empty because they've got extra games to play earlier in the year. It's an absolute logistical mess for the organisers. Whatever happens, we've got to say now, right, if you come, you come. If you don't, you don't. We're having this World Cup and we will have our Australia and our New Zealand as if we're Kerry Packer in World Series cricket in the 70s. We're going to do this come hell or high water. And, two fingers up to you again. It's going to happen whether you like it or not.
I think there's two things to that. One is they've made as firm as a commitment as they can. Let's not forget, they asked for it to be postponed until 2022. So even they themselves morally would find it very difficult not to come in 2022 because we're actually giving them what they asked for. So I'm not as bothered about that, to be perfectly honest. I think there is a case for saying, right, now we've given you what you want. Don't you dare renege on it for a second time. And I can only think that what would make them do that would be if vaccine rollouts in both countries were, well, we should be okay because we're hitting our targets. But if, let's say, they were 8 months behind where they were supposed to be, that would be the only potential reason not to come. And actually, I don't think it's a valid reason anyway. So I think the fact that they're getting what they asked for makes it incredibly difficult for them to turn around next year and say, we're not coming. That would be the end of International Rugby League as we know it if they did that. And then I think, we'd know exactly where everybody stood. The other issue I think that's probably even more important at the moment, bearing in mind where we are in this country with Super League, is that it looks increasingly like we are going to have to do over here what we refuse to do this season. And that is probably either finish the season a bit earlier or make some provision for having less games during the season to aid the World Cup, which we tacitly didn't do in 2021. If this World Cup had gone ahead, our players would have been knackered, let's be honest. They look tired now, and they've still got at least one more round of double week fixtures to fit in. So the schedule of matches that we came up with was absolutely appalling. particularly when restrictions were pushed back by a month. To keep going with loop fixtures is disastrous on the one hand for trying to achieve some sort of change in Super League, but also you're right about the window for the World Cup in 2022. It's got to be almost the minute the Commonwealth Games end and finish just before the Football World Cup starts. And I think that means that our grand final, which would have been first week in October, might have to be the end of September. So let's see what compromises Super League are prepared to make for the World Cup. And let's hope that it isn't right. Well, we'll start the season in the middle of January then and still have our 25 rounds. There has to now be some serious and earnest debate with Super League stroke the RFL to say, you're disappointed the World Cup isn't going ahead. Certain clubs like St Helens, Warrington, Leeds, even Rochdale, I think Andy Maisie came out today and said the fact that they're now not getting the warm-up game with Fiji, which is going to celebrate their 150th anniversary, which you can't do next year because it'll be 151st. That's cost them £100,000, which for a club like Rochdale, that is, being hold below the, it's the Bismarck, isn't it? You've been hold below the waterline. So I think we need to do some stuff as well now that it's got to be arranged and show an absolute commitment. And then that will show to the Australians that, if we're prepared to do it, you have absolutely no grounds not to do it. I also think that people like Trent Robinson, Wayne Bennett, who've fallen a little bit back into line with, I can understand why it's been postponed, it's the right decision. They are clearly seething. And I don't think they would accept, and Bennett said it, that, if it's going to be played in 2022, fine, but it's just got to be played. And I think that the RLPA in Australia have issued a pretty strongly worded statement saying it has to go ahead. Nothing but respect for John Dutton and the Rugby League World Cup and the way they've gone about it. So I'm almost as convinced that it's not about Australia and New Zealand next year. They're going to find it very hard to worm out at it, although they can because they just have. What are we going to do over here to facilitate it?
Not a lot. I should apologise for my wobbly camera, by the way. I feel a bit like Nicholas Witchell when he had to sit on those lesbians on the 6 o'clock news. It's the dog trying to get up on my knee. There's a reference for the teenagers there. Just to add some levity, because we're angry, we're not happy. We're all looking forward to this World Cup. It was going to be the great end to the year, maybe a kickstart for rugby league in this country, and it's been taken away. And as I mentioned earlier, there are far more people with far more reasons to be angry than we are, but they have to be diplomatic about it, and we can kind of express our anger because it is a very frustrating time because, as you say, our hand in this country is very much a poor one. This was something that was giving us hope, in a sense. As they say, it's the hope that kills you. And you feel let down by the whole situation. And I'm sure the players feel that as well. Although
I think the reason I feel let down more than anything is this is of our making, if our is the word rugby league. We've all had to sacrifice a lot of things, birthday celebrations, meeting people. And let's be serious, lives have been sacrificed. That is far more important. But, there wasn't a lot anybody could do about that other than try their very, very best to get through it. And one of the things we did to look forward to getting through it was have that little World Cup beacon at the end of it from a purely rugby league point of view. To have that now taken away of our own volition, really is desperately self-inflicted, and that's what hurts. That every early morning or late at night we're sitting up marveling in what's happening in Tokyo. We're watching sport throughout the summer just starting to regenerate itself. I understand and appreciate that Australia is now starting to feel some of the things that we've already been through, and talking to some Australians, it's not being dealt with particularly well over there, not least in terms of the vaccination rollout. But we have decided to cancel something ourselves rather than had to put our hands up and say, look, when Super League and the Championship and League One stopped in March 2020. There was nothing anybody could. There was inevitability about that, and it was absolutely the right thing to do. That was when safety took priority, and we're still having issues. Hopefully we'll have 6 games this weekend, and as yet, those 6 games are scheduled to go ahead. It's Thursday night. No one's stepping down on that. I know there's a couple of clubs of bare bones of the squads they can pick, but we're trying to tiptoe our way through this. To lose the light at the end of the tunnel of 2021 is sad, and that's why I am particularly annoyed.
Accountability of this decision probably down to the Australians, but we, the people at the World Cup, had to make it. I think there's a general lack of accountability in rugby league, Phil, and this has angered me for a long time. And because we've mentioned things off air that I can't mention on there. But I look at everything that happens in rugby league at the minute, and there's no accountability from anyone. I look at Featherstone Rovers this week, and their fine of £10,000, a lot of money, 2 points deducted. Don't actually know how that works in terms of the league table, but I can't be bothered to look at it either, because who cares what's going on, because they'll change the format anyway. They release a statement. There's no accountability there. They don't hold their hands up and say, it was us, fair cop. It's all money. Well, the council said this and the police said this. Yeah, the RFL run the sport. They choose what the punishments are. The only person I think who's been accountable for anything recently is Luke Gale, who did stand up and say, it was my fault, even though it's never been officially announced what it was. Everyone knows what it was, and he stood up and said, it's my fault, fair cop. Every single player who gets banned, it seems, by the disciplinary puts a statement out on social media blaming everyone else. Like Joel Tompkins last year blaming Richie Myler. And there's no accountability there. He doesn't get a further ban for that. He's just the latest example I can think of.
Well, I'll give you one. Jake Mamo, who is somebody we always love to win the Man of the Match award, because we never have a clue what he's going to say. After the game against Wigan last week, I think it was last week, I've no idea what day of the week it is, he went and shook hands with the crowd, had selfies taken with them, hugged people, then walked back to his teammates, put his arm around them, and presumably went in the dressing room with them. Well, that may be being investigated. I don't know. But what I do know is he's played since. The RFL / Super League have not mentioned anything about breaching any COVID regulations. What sort of a message does that send out? When on the one hand, we've been saying we're going to fine players for celebrating, we're not going to have scrums because of the danger of infection. And there we have a very high profile player who is filmed, and it's extensive film on Sky, doing everything that we are told you shouldn't be doing. So how does that work? Who's accountable for that? Is he accountable for his actions? Should Warrington have said or done something? Should the RFL or Super League immediately have stepped in and said, I'm sorry, but you cannot now play for a fortnight. You need to be tested every day, and you can't train with the rest of the players until you've completed quarantine. And I'm not picking on him, but that is the latest example that I've seen of not being accountable. And what I would say is, if you don't follow John Dutton on Twitter, and it's John without the H, see the little 20-second video clip that he put out today, where he actually apologizes to all of us for not being able to deliver the World Cup, which is something that's been completely taken out of his hands. That's accountability. That's leadership. And there isn't enough of it in the sport.
I saw some idiot on social media saying the money we spent on John Dutton would have been better spent on youth development, which just shows you the idiocy of people in this country and involved in our sport.
Well, I mean, as we're on in a mood,
yeah,
and
we are in a mood.
Some people, no doubt, will send us in reaction saying negative.
Okay.
I want to talk about whatever structure we're going to come up with.
I told people we weren't going to do that, Phil.
No, but what I'm going to say, I'm not interested in what the structure is. What I'm interested in is who is deciding. Because the Super League clubs that have made such a mess of where we are at the moment and have spent, by conservative reckoning, £4 million that they didn't have to break away, to employ somebody, to build offices, and are almost looking for the RFL to beg them to come back are going to make the next decision about what we do. None of them should be allowed to make this decision because there's no accountability in what they've just done. The company that some people wanted us to sign up to equity finance with, because it would have been an expedient move to give them some cash without doing the proper due diligence, hello Adam Pearson, have gone bust. So not only have we spent £750,000 for an introduction that was completely the wrong one, but some people wanted us to sign that agreement and we'd never have got the money. And yet these are the people that are sitting around the table that will decide where the sport is going. And I think it is time to just say enough is enough. That as fans, I don't know about you, but I'm getting a lot of feedback from people who are passionate fans of this sport saying that they are completely disenchanted with it at the moment.
We all love rugby league and we ain't going to walk away from it because you can't break that bond. We're stuck with it. We're stuck with it until one of us, either we die or the sport dies. We're stuck with it. We can't help it. I go back to Bradford, and this is where accountability comes from. How many times did Bradford fail? Not just over a 10-year period, but over 3 years, over a year. And no one has been held accountable for that. George wrote that article in the magazine. No one's been accountable for that. Oh, should we have an inquiry? No, we can't have an inquiry into that. The MPs who jump on the bandwagon when the elite academies came out a few weeks ago, a decision which they've got no investment in. They don't know anything about why it's happened. They're just jumping on because some fans moan that Hull KR's not got an academy. Well, have a look at who they're bloody employing in that academy before you have a moan. You know, they jump on the bandwagon about that, but they don't moan about an actual thing which has obvious ramifications from the top of the sport to the bottom as to why Bradford happened, why Odsal happened, why the sports, why are Bradford playing at Odsal now? And I'm not picking on Bradford. I know people will think I'm picking on Bradford, but I'm not, because it could be any club. Why are they playing at a ground that's not ready to be played at? But we won't have an inquiry into that. We'll leave that alone. That's okay. Because if we do, we know all the skeletons are coming out of the cupboards, and everyone knows that. So that's fine.
Who's accountable for women's matches not having doctors? Now, it's simple things like that, and this isn't aimed at anyone who works in either the governing body at the moment. I think there are some people there that are producing results under the most extreme pressure and lack of resource. I just don't know how as a governing body you can be still waiting to hear what Super League are going to give you from the television deal, because that's the way it's worked. We are broken, and Super League need to take responsibility for the fixture schedule that they're putting the players under. Absolutely mealy-mouthed nonsense about welfare that they talk about. On the one hand, we've got to get rid of the second game at Easter because we're a responsible governing body, and please don't sue us for an increase in concussion because we take HIAs really seriously. Nonsense. Now, again, the self-defeating argument in all of this is what we've been saying. What people have been saying as a potential way forward is an independent commission. Well, Australia supposedly has an independent commission that is so run by the NRL clubs, as we've seen with their decision on the World Cup. It's, it almost is throw the baby out with the bathwater and last chance saloon and all the things that are nothing to do with being negative. But just go back again to something that you hit upon there and that I just mentioned about people being disillusioned. We've always spoken and people who are passionate about the sport being the best it can be, which is why we have these debates. But tonight we're annoyed, so we're in offensive mode.
Full mode, yeah.
So often it's about how do we bring in new audiences, how do we create new markets. We get upset about things like Toronto, not because the owner might be the wrong guy, but hey, can we really afford to throw away 10,000 new fans? That's one argument. And it's an important argument. And having an expansion policy is part of what whoever it is deciding what the future looks like should be coming up with. A genuine strategy and resource for expansion, or an admission it's never going to happen. And in which case you then, Renee got all rights to have any coverage in any newspaper ever. So looking for new markets, repositioning yourself, appealing to a new audience is something that has been spoken about probably since 1895. And the debate is whether we've done it well or not whether we should do it. I think there's a different problem at the moment, which we've never really had since the early to mid 70s. And that is a lot of our core audience who we rely on, we've pissed off. Now, it may well be that it's a lot of different things that have annoyed them. It might be the not knowing what day of the week's fixtures are going to be played, matches being called off at short notice. It might be the standard of the disciplinary and perceived unfairness in comparative punishments. It might be the standard of refereeing. It always has been. But again, there is an issue about if a video referee makes the wrong decision, what the hell is the point of having a video referee? Or do what the BBC do and at least let us hear the rationale behind the decision so that we can say, right, well, somebody needs to be accountable because they said X happened and it's clear that it didn't. Y did. So now you need to follow that up and tell us. But if you don't even hear how that decision comes about, that's part of the problem. But what we're now doing, and it may even be the World Cup being postponed. That might be the final straw for a lot of people saying, I am now completely out of love with this sport and the way it's being run. But we're in real danger here. And I think the crowd numbers that we've seen since restrictions are lifted should be really worrying, really, really concerning. And I get that some of that is you're going to play matches at 7:30 on a Sunday night. Not everybody who's eligible to come can or will choose to do so. But again, if you keep putting obstacles in the way for people coming back, they will fall out of habit and love with the sport. If we start losing our core audience, it doesn't matter that we can't find a new one. There won't be enough money being generated to go round. And anybody who thinks that's a negative comment, please live in the world of reality. That's happening.
Maybe it's my fault for not knowing when games are. Maybe I should, know exactly when teams are playing and when, but I didn't know who Wakefield were playing this week. And I should know that. And I know I'm kind of a bit jaded with everything. So maybe that's an excuse, but I didn't know we were playing on Friday against Huddersfield. I was like, right. And it's a fixture I don't care about anyway, because, what a boring fixture that is. We play it all the time. I feel frustrated. I felt frustrated for a long time. We get a piece of paper every year with our accreditation, Phil. And, I've never hidden the fact that I feel lucky to be accredited. And I feel sometimes I've got that imposter syndrome thing. And I shouldn't have, but I do. We get a list of things we're allowed to do and things we're not allowed to do. I mean, we're not allowed to take pictures from the press box, but everyone does because that's what you do on Twitter. Is, hey, look, I'm at Headingley. Look, there's the pitch. But, people in our sector have certainly broken those terms and conditions of being an accredited reporter by the RFL, and nothing happens. Where's the accountability? You can do whatever you want. You can get in, you can do whatever you want. Everything's free. You can get a job on our league. It doesn't matter. What's the point? What is the point of anything when there's no accountability? Because who is to blame? There's got to be someone to blame. This is the problem with the Bradford thing. Going back to that, is that, we can't have an inquiry because it's in the past. But it's not, because it's the current, it's the future. Everything. Why don't the RFL buy the AJ Bell Stadium or the lease on it? Because they haven't got any money. No, I know that, but why not? Or buy whichever. Why don't they buy Coventry's ground?
It's not an iconic venue.
Why don't they buy Londoner ground?
I think again, we're not going to talk about any particular proposal, be it short form, long form, any form of game. But the fact is that we need to impose standards to be taken seriously. And the only way you can ever be seen to be independent is if everybody signs up for those standards to be instituted. Those standards were written in 1994. It was called Framing the Future. So the first thing that I think the RFL and Super League, if they're going to form the hybrid again of how this game moves forward, is agree amongst themselves that Framing the Future will be instituted. It was rewritten in 1997 after Super League had come in. So there were some slight amendments to take account of the fact that the game had gone to summer, and we'd had a cursory debate about what mergers might look like and immediately put them to one side. But that report is the blueprint. It's the framework for a responsible, accountable sport, and it will take 3 to 5 years to implement, but that is your working document. It's as valid today as it was when it was written. Now, if both sides agreed that that was the starting point, your structure would then start to take care of itself, because clubs would know exactly where they sat, what they measured up to, what they didn't, what they needed to put in place. There's whole sections in there about not just on field, but what your front office needs to look like, the positions you've got to have. And clubs that either haven't got it or in the short term couldn't afford to implement that, they are deciding where they sit. It's not somebody saying you're in, you're out, or, and you'd look at a Coventry or a Newcastle and you would be able, by independent criteria, to be able to compare them to, say, a Featherstone or an Oldham or a Swinton, and it would be a completely impartial process, because you've signed up to the fact that it's standards driven. And until we do that, we are just shifting deck chairs on the Titanic.
We fate a club owner who, when he ran a club, got rid of the academy at that club, and we hold him up as this high example of what we want the sport to be.
But it's a simple thing. Like, and we've talked about it a million times. If you have promotion relegation and you have a limited amount of resource, you will get rid of your academy, because if you're not in the top division and you're spending all the money that you've got on players that you think will keep you in the top division, then there's no point having an academy, because that's what promotion and relegation does. So all of those fundamental questions we're not asking at the moment, at a time where we may well be the last opportunity to ask that. I don't hear anybody in a position of power saying, we've got a document, let's sit down, let's look at how relevant it is today. We may need to tweak it again, because we're 20 years on from when it was last looked at. So some clubs have already got stadiums that didn't have, some perhaps still haven't. So some have got academies, some haven't. Some have got a staff structure, some haven't. Some have got a foundation, a charitable arm to deliver in the community, some haven't. Let's just revisit it, see it's still relevant, update the little passages perhaps where it isn't. But these are the spectator comforts that should be an absolute bare minimum. This is the work that should be going on around the club that is off the field, away from the rugby, and this is the pathways that we need to have for kids all the way from school all the way through to the potential to become a professional. And if we're not prepared to do that, the words pissing and wind spring to mind.
There's something else I was going to say, and I've completely forgotten what it was now. Oh, no, is it John Dutton? The one thing I took away this morning was a quote from him about leadership. And he said, they don't make popular decisions, they make tough decisions. And that's what they've had to do in delaying this World Cup. And I think the prime example of this in rugby league at the minute, in this country domestic league, is the backtracking on the elite academies, because a decision was made, a couple of people kick off, and they reneged on that decision. Where's the leadership there?
Not only that, but the guy who got thrown under the bus for that was the guy who was put up to defend it. And again, that isn't leadership. That in any organisation, that's not management. You brief somebody, they give maybe that was their best shot, but you put them up. There was nobody else. And then you pull the rug from underneath them 2 days later. And they're expected to carry on as if their position hasn't been undermined in any way whatsoever. And again, it's not desperately relevant, but I was extremely fortunate to go to a lunch this week in tribute to Matt King. And I think our listeners will probably know, our regular listeners certainly will know the story of Matt, because we paid tribute to him at the beginning of the year when he desperately, sadly passed away. And a wonderful man, a gentleman for whom the word inspiration was invented for. And it was a lovely lunch, and it did him proud. It was hosted by Eddie Hemmings. Mike Stevenson flew in from Australia, but made sure he came in time for the lunch because they were friends. Richard Lewis came up, and how the revisionists now look at the Lewis era and wish he was still in charge. Spoke beautifully and emotionally about his bond with Matt, because he'd been to see him, because he was then the executive chairman of the RFL. Stephen Ball spoke wonderfully about the formation of the benefit fund, a benevolent fund on the back of, we need to do something for people like Matt. Tim Adams, who is on the chair of the board of trustees of Rugby League Cares, again spoke about how so many projects have come out of all of this that Matt can be proud of, because it was what happened to him that triggered people to do something. And indeed, Nigel Wood spoke very passionately about it, because he was actually in charge at the RFL to make sure that the benevolent fund could be started. Gary Hetherington, who was there, was the president of the RFL at the time, and reinstituted the president's ball to start fundraising for the benevolent fund. These are all people that have attracted enormous criticism. Ralph Rimmer spoke about how there is now going to be an educational bursary named after Matt King. When you're in a room with people like that, and they speak with the honesty and the passion that they did about what we do best as a sport, which is look after each other when we need to, there is genuine hope. You come out of that room and say, if we could bottle what was in there, irrespective of the personalities, irrespective of issues that they are perhaps attached to, you sort of understand that it's not quite black and white. Somebody who might be an administrator cannot be all bad. There are, I am told that Ralph Rimmer's relationship with government at the moment has been really significant in getting some funding for the sport. Now, whether people think it's the right amount of funding, whether people shudder at the fact that it's a conservative government, a working class sport is getting into. The fact is, we needed their support to keep going, and that support has rolled into the World Cup. That one of the reasons we had to wait until today to get a definitive decision is we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that government has a really big say in this. They've put up to £30 million into this, and they, again, we shouldn't say it because we're not allowed to say it, but they were going to pay for the quarantining, they were going to pay for the charter flights. It was, if we need to do a little bit more to get this thing on, here's a little bit more. Now, the fact is that public money won't need to be spent now, but they were prepared to stump up. So what I'm saying is, it's not about necessarily some of the people who we want to criticise, and we be in the game, not you and I. It's about the collective will to see that when we get it right, the ethics and essence of what we are still valid. But with all the infighting that goes on, with all the blame pointing, with all the lack of accountability, that's what we lose. And that's what we've got to get back. And for 5 minutes in that room, you think, yeah, we can get that back. And then the World Cup gets cancelled the next day and you think, bastards.
It's been kind of cathartic, this. I still feel angry about things, but I feel angry because nothing changes. Everything stays the same. It's like that song by Delamitri, nothing ever happens. Everything that's been a problem, or that is an issue in my brain for the last few years, remains in situ, and nothing can change that. And I don't know why, because there's no reason not to change the things, the small things that are wrong with this sport. But it comes down to no one's accountable. You look at we mentioned Warrington earlier, and Steve Price has been sanctioned by the RFL this week. You look at the statement Warrington put out straight after he said what he said on TV. I think almost Sky apologised more for what was said than the statement from the club. And I'm not saying the club should be on their knees and this, that, and the other, but it's almost like Brian Carney had to apologise more for what was said than the club and Steve Price. And why do people find it so hard? And again, I'm not talking about that situation. I'm talking about just in general, to apologise for things they've done wrong on the pitch. Why do players keep bringing out these statements, absolving themselves of blame and blaming other people? We had the incident at Featherstone early in the year, the player who was banned for something on social media. No contrition. Why? I just don't understand what is wrong, that there is so little accountability for things that are obviously wrong. Just apologise. Just give us something so we can say they've apologised, they've done wrong, we move on. But no one does that.
We're a sport that thrives on redemption, though, aren't we? So
and
that's
no one
exactly
does that,
what we should be doing.
So we just,
Well,
none of those people ever apologise because they make mistakes again, and the same articles get rewritten time and time again.
No, I think we tonight we pointed some fingers, and I feel better for doing so. But I think the sadness deep within me at the moment is that this is all of our own making.
Yeah.
Now, if we were the victim of something, if we were being prejudiced, if another sport was saying you can't have your World Cup because, then we would rightly be circling the wagons, we'd be beating our chests, we'd be all standing together, we'd be talking about our proud history and how we were being done down. I think what hurts the most about what is happening in the sport at the moment, and be that the postponing of the World Cup or who is sitting around a table deciding where the sport in the Northern Hemisphere is going, is all of this is of our own making. And again, you're right what you say about players don't take responsibility for some of their actions, but I'd again point to the Leeds Warrington game last, whatever day of the week it was, Sunday night, and say, of course there were mistakes, but it was an end-to-end game in the short period that both teams had to turn around. That was a spectacle that we had absolutely no right to expect. I left Headingley late on Sunday night going, I love these people. Don't care who wins, who loses. I think to be served up that level of entertainment under such duress, with so many people had every right just to either ask to be taken off early or lay down and cry or, be too injured to take the field. I just think we need administration that is as good as they are. And I can never point the finger at players for what they are trying to produce. But this whole sorry episode of where we are, and the fact that even Sky are trying to tell us in the politest possible terms, we've got some issues that we need to deal with them pretty quickly or we're unmarketable. Where are we starting to do that? Because this is in our own hands. And clearly, going right back to what you said to prompt this latest bit of the discussion, I think it's all about just saying we acknowledge that there are things we need to do to get this right. And John Dutton did that today. And Chris Brindley did that today. And Troy Grant did that today. And they didn't have to do that because this is a situation that wasn't of their making. In fact, they've done everything they can to try and overcome the obstacles that were put in their way. But they fronted up. They were accountable. They said how disappointed they were. John Dutton kept emphasising, we only want to look forward, not back. Yeah, that is such an admirable trait to have when he has spent 5 years of his life on the verge of delivering something and he can't do it. So I think you're right. I think we need lobbyists to hold people to account, and those lobbyists need to be the media. We're too placid. It needs to be the public, and that's not writing letters to League Express. It needs to be people who are, I know somebody this week who has written to Ralph Rimmer and said, I'm a diehard fan, and these are the reasons why I'm falling out of love with a sport that I've been a season ticket holder for 60 years. Now, if people like the governing body don't acknowledge and take that on board and say, yeah, all right, it's one letter, but we need to be cognizant of all of this, because this is damaging. If this is representative of someone who's watched the game for so long and is falling out. I mean, our good friend, and this is not telling tales here, Mr. G. Schofield, if he was on this now, and before anybody asks, he is isolated.
I know Five Live were trying to get hold of him the other day. I hope they did.
He has tested positive. He's bearing up well, but he can't smell or taste anything. If he was on this now, he would tell you how disenchanted he is with a game that he loves with all of his might, and how he's now finding it hard to even watch matches, not necessarily because of the standard of the play, because he's fallen out of love with it. And he's the first to admit, he owes it everything. His whole life revolves around who he was as a rugby league player, what he achieved, the recognition he gets going down to Bellevue Market in his dressing gown. It all comes from rugby league, and he will be the first to tell you that he's so grateful to the sport for giving him opportunity. He had a rare talent, made the most of it, and that was down to him. But rugby league gave him the stage, and he was brilliant, but the game was good to him as well. He would admit that. And every conversation I have with him at the moment is all about how disenchanted he is. That has to say something. That has to. And until we start responding to a brighter, better future that's of our making, and not selfishness determining which roads we're going down, be that the World Cup or owners of clubs who only want their system and not somebody else's, or perhaps even are prepared to let in an independent voice to tell them how they sit in all of this. We will be what we will be.
The politicians. I'm going to use a strange analogy here. The strange things that you remember from years ago, and I always remember listening to a phone-in. I don't know if I've ever mentioned this before. There were two presenters on the radio, and one of them was hosting the program afterwards, and it was a psychic phone-in, which is very much a thing from the dim and distant past. And Mike Allen, great presenter, no longer with us, said they're like car mechanics. There are good psychics and there are bad psychics, and there are good politicians and bad politicians. I'm not going to say every politician is in it for the money and he's bad, even though that's the perception of them at the minute. And we obviously know that in the past there have been some very, very good politicians in this area. I'm speaking about Wakefield, who have been very good for rugby league at every level. I'm not sure we have those people in government at the minute, or in Parliament rather. It's a shame we don't. But I wish they would stand up for the sport. They've got this group which gets money from the RFL, because I looked online to do some bit of research earlier today. And the RFL gives them money. That's interesting. But what are they doing for the good of the sport at the moment? It's okay putting your head above the parapet when it's talking about the academies, but they haven't tweeted since December. They've got a Twitter account. They haven't tweeted since December. I'm not talking about Jacob Rees-Mogg showboating in Parliament about the Aussies pulling out. He's irrelevant. He's not part of this group. Where are our politicians to stand up for rugby league? That's almost the campaign, is it? Stand up for rugby league. We need to do something to push everything forward. As you say, it's too easy to blame Ralph Rimmer. I don't know if I've had a conversation with him or not. I probably have at some point. Or we had on the show. It's not about him as a person or him and his abilities. He's in the position he's in for whatever reason. It's about the future, and we have to decide it now, because as you mentioned with Sky, and that should ring warning bells for everyone in the sport, because if they don't see a future in rugby league in terms of bringing money into them, they will do as they've done with Speedway and other sports in the past and drop it. They had Spanish football on for years, got a loyal audience, didn't cost that much. As soon as it was too much to pay for, got rid. And rugby league costs more than that because they have to put together the whole package. That should ring alarm bells. Yes, people will say Sky have ruined the sport or whatever. The sport was ruined long before the money came in. The future is
now. I
don't think enough people realise how crucial this next TV deal is. And it's not about whether Team A or Team B in League One from the Heartlands get their extra few quid to waste on some foreigners or whatever. It's about the future of the sport. And we won't be talking about a World Cup because we won't have a team. And we don't want that to happen.
We're at a tipping point. And that's why we care so much. And that's why we've probably been overly passionate tonight. And I suspect that some people will say, oh, it's another negative listen. But it's a realistic listen. It's not all about transfer speculation and clickbait. There are enough people out there that are doing just that, and good luck to them. And if you get an exclusive, fantastic. That does make the world go round. That's sport. But there has to be an earnest debate about deeper issues. There has to be not just a debate, but there has to be honesty. People need to get in a room and feel that they can talk openly about perhaps what a way forward is, and it won't suit everybody. And going back to your John Dutton quote, it's absolutely right. So leadership is about not necessarily being popular, but making the tough decisions. The question wasn't really asked today because there was so much going on. I think it was hinted at, but clearly all of those people that work for Rugby League World Cup 2021, their contracts run out at, I think it's the 1st of December. So people like John we're gonna have to persuade him as well as everybody else. Would you stay on for another year? And that may no means be a given. He may already have been offered something for 2022. So we're in danger if we're not realistic and aware of where we are, that we'll lose some more very good people. And again, I know that there were some things that Richard Lewis did that people say harm the game. I mean, he was the guy that, to get Sport England funding, almost, as it turned out, saw the demise of Great Britain as a concept. Although that was never, from what I can remember, his plan was Great Britain would still be around 1 year in every 4. But by splitting England, Scotland, Ireland and Wales, there was an opportunity to get a lot more external funding, which actually is true. And you look back and go, that there was a time then where we did value international rugby. He did have a seat at the international board, and he did have a certain gravitas about him because he played international sport at the highest level, and it was a different sport. So he was bringing across the fact that the pinnacle of sport is international representation. And I was fortunate enough to play Davis Cup for my country, and one of the things I want to do in my reign of office is to reinvigorate international rugby league. And he spoke to the Australians about that. But people forget we didn't have a World Cup from 2000 to 2008. But he helped reinstitute the pathway to a World Cup, which the ones we've had have been successful, some more than others. I don't think, again, we look back at 2017 now on the way that the Aussies have handled themselves in this particular instance, and they didn't promote the World Cup when it was over there. Oh, it's our turn to have it. We'll put some games on. Oh, weren't New Zealand, Tonga good? Right, can we go back to pre-season training now? But I think what Richard bought, and I'm not here to extol him in any way whatsoever, what some other people who were around rugby league at the time, one of whom I think, again, it's fair to mention, was Kevin Rudd on the setting up of the European Federation, which was something that Richard Lewis instituted and Kevin delivered upon in the first instance. They're great people. They're really good administrators who had a vision beyond where we are at the moment. And neither of those two people are involved in our sport. And you have to ask why. You have to ask why Kevin Sinfield is leaving. And that's it. There's a little bit of that in the new edition of the magazine that I haven't mentioned yet in the hour and a half we've been talking. But in Forty20, there is a little analysis of, can the game really afford to lose a Kevin Sinfield when the only person that the outside world knows about in relation to the game is Kevin Sinfield. Great that his son is carrying on the tradition. But what does that say about the sport? Does it say, it's his domestic relationship at a club has meant he wants to move away? Or could we have kept involved in something? Let's not forget he worked at the RFL. He reinvigorated the performance unit. He was very much behind getting women and wheelchair treated the same in terms of preparation and the World Cups being equally ranked as anybody else. But again, he doesn't work for the RFL anymore. Let's think about Tony Smith, who at a time when he left Leeds, didn't just become the coach of Great Britain. He took on the role of, if you like, the first director of rugby, although I don't think it was called that. And he wanted to go in and change some things about the game in 2008 to enable him to have better preparation as the Great Britain / England coach, but also to look after the sport, to take it to the next level, to make sure that we were being governed properly. And he found in the era that he was working, there was only so far he could go, and then he wanted to step back from it. And again, another question that I think we need to ask, which is prompted by everything we've talked about tonight, particularly with regard to the World Cup, is why do really good people walk away from the sport? I have no answer to that, but it's a question that we need to ask.
I saw a job advert today and I thought, that'd be perfect for a friend of mine. And it's outside rugby league. And I thought, well, we need to keep these talented people. There are plenty of talented people in rugby league, very talented people in every sphere of the sport. And
absolutely.
I tell you what struck me yesterday. Doncaster Knights, second division rugby union team, championship club, had a job advert come up randomly on Twitter in their media department. So communication, something, the same kind of thing. And the salary there was more than was offered the next day for a job in a similar role at a Super League club. And I thought, how does that happen? A championship rugby union club, which won't have the crowds that we have in Super League, which certainly doesn't get the central funding that a Super League club get. How can that happen? And I know clubs don't pay any attention to anything that goes on off the field, do they? Because that's it. Well, as long as we, got this, the on-field stuff sorted, the off-field stuff doesn't matter. But no wonder people look at these jobs and think, no, I'm going to go off somewhere else. But that's just one example of something random I saw and thought, no wonder we.
Why did Peter Deakin, who is arguably the most innovative marketeer we had at the start of Super League, the creator of Bullmania, it's never one person, but he was the driving force behind it. Why did he jump ship and go to Saracens? Because he saw even 20 odd years ago, there was a limit to what he could do in the sport. Why is potential capped in rugby league so often and driven away?
We're talking the sport down, Phil. We're talking the sport down.
No, we're not. We're at a point where these questions need to be asked and considered and taken into account for where we go in the future. Because certainly you're a young buck, but I have seen a lot of this before. And I do think that we are at a point where we need to ask some realistic, honest and searching questions of ourselves. Not just, Mr. A, somebody who sits in the throne. But what we need to do is decide what we want. Be united. But we can't. And unless even a tiny little forum like this with our core of loyal watchers and listeners who we're extremely grateful to are also prepared to say enough is enough, or we need more, or we need administrators to measure up to what players are doing, then nothing will change. And in fact, not only will nothing change, it will continue to slide. And if you don't think it's sliding, you probably shouldn't be listening to this.
No, as the dogs start barking at me, we should license Delamitri's song to be the official anthem of Rugby League World Cup 2022 or something, because 2020 when it's still being called that, because nothing ever happens. Hence the frustration. Hence the simmering anger that you have to put up with every Monday when we do before we do the program. And then pretend everything's all right for 2 hours and then go back to normal. I don't know. I just, you'd hope someone would see this as a catalyst for change, but I just fear that the catalyst for change will be when Sky pull out and then there's no money and everyone goes, what do we do now? But I hope that's not the case. Obviously, I hope that's not the case.
Well, that's another of the reasons which didn't concern the NRL at all, and in fact, in some ways, it's nothing to do with them. That's why I desperately think we needed the World Cup this autumn, because we are at a point where, you know, we need a spark, and that would have provided it. And you know, people are now saying, "Oh, let's extend the season." I just think we need to try and get to the end of this season in the best way we can on the dates that we've got scheduled in. You know, the major venues coming up that have been set aside for them. If we can have some international rugby for 2 or 3 weeks, and it involves Jamaica and Wales and Scotland and Ireland and France and England and whoever is available to play, that they get an opportunity at least to get some players together and play some meaningful matches and award some caps. But we now need to rule the line as soon as we can under 2021. It's been a horrible year. For so many reasons, and mainly the players who've been asked to perform ridiculous feats, and hope that we're going into a better, braver, more perceptive, meaningful 2022. But that has to start now. And if it needs people on the outside, like our good listeners, to lobby, please start doing it.
At least we could bring back Yorkshire versus Lancashire, as Chris Hill suggested this week. I don't know why you thought that, but
that was just me banging my head on the desk.
It failed before. It failed the time before that. They binned it off the time before that. Then someone comes in. I think it was Kyle Amor. Oh wait, well, I know it's Brad Singleton. Where's Cumbria? Why are they involved? Where's London? Why have we got a team representing the South or whatever? It's just
didn't we in the Academy Roses match, which nobody knew was on and played at 11 o'clock on a Wednesday morning. There was London playing for Yorkshire.
Yeah. Well, Adam Hills is playing for Lancashire in the PDRL origin, isn't he? And he's not from London. He's not from Lancashire.
Why on earth couldn't we have called that East versus West?
I don't know. Because we have to hang on to this thing which... Lancashire doesn't exist in rugby league.
Barrow.
Apart from Barrow. I don't know. It's just that always annoys me. Can't go back to Yorkshire, Lancashire again. Come on.
I think what this podcast more than anything has tried to highlight, and congratulations if you've stuck with us to the end. Thank you very much.
We're all turned off.
The World Cup has heightened where we are. It's given us a lot to think about. But it's no good sitting back anymore. I have nothing but admiration and respect for anybody that wants to debate the sport. I think debate is the most useful thing that we can do. And it needs to be honest and earnest and positions taken into account. And then the best solution comes out, and it might not suit everybody. In fact, history tells you it won't. But unless we're prepared to do that, and that pressure maybe needs to come from the outside now as much as the inside, then can't say that whatever happens, we weren't party to. So,
well, those who deserve
people.
Yes, those who deserve the blame will never get it, because that's all that happens in rugby league. Everyone who's at fault never gets the blame. I've got him out. I've got started with a book. Here's another book. Here's Tony Collins' as Rugby League in 20th Century Britain. Will there be, long after we've gone from this earth, another Tony Collins writing Rugby League in 21st Century Britain, or will that be the memoirs of the end of this sport? I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. We don't know, and we hope it's not.
This sport will never die, but you want it to be the best it can be. And at the moment, it's heading back to being a very minor sport.
I still didn't speak about any of the matches because I can't remember them. Oh, I do remember something. Hull, no attack, no creativity. But that's going back to last Thursday against Leeds. So much has changed since then. But I can't remember any of the rugby that's been on, because
there's been some rugby.
I think you mentioned Leeds and Warrington, so we have talked about rugby on this. And
Catalan are still top of the league.
Yeah, Toronto beat Toronto. To lose beat Featherstone, then that might be pointless. But I don't know. Well, we'll be back on Monday, won't we, to talk more, talk about rugby league and fingers crossed in a more positive frame of mind. But I think we've needed this to be cathartic as I used the word earlier. Because
but I see this as a call to arms as well. I think if there is entertainment, absolutely. Education, if you can, inform, inspire. We're all about all of that. But actually, I think what's happened this week is enough of a wake-up call for everybody who passionately cares about the sport to say, roll your sleeves up, make your position felt and known. Don't allow this opportunity to be wasted, because time is of the essence, and you're important. Your voice is important. Make it heard.
Use it for the right reasons. Forget club loyalties and nonsense. It's all about the future of the sport, and hopefully there still is one. Phil, thank you. Everyone should go buy the new 4020. I need to finish my column for the next one, which has got very little rugby league in it at the minute. I need to change that. But yeah, hopefully people take something from this and don't think it was just as moaning for an hour and a half, as you say, which pretty much it was. But what can you do? There's
a message behind what we're trying to say, and that is, it's up to you.
We feel this way because we love it, and if we didn't love it, we wouldn't feel this way.
And if you love it, make that love known.
We'll see you on Monday. We'll be back and live behind the desk, and we'll be back, and we'll hopefully be more positive. But we can't promise that.
We weren't not positive. We're realistic. Hashtag realistic rugby league.
That'll do. Go and share this with all your friends and tell them, this is the real world. We don't, as Scully says all the time, live on Fantasy Island. But some people still think we do. But we need to drum those fantasies out and get the realists in.